Hey everybody, and welcome back to some more of my Reddit Roundup. On this one we're going to do kind of a deep dive into a subreddit that's reached some popularity recently due to some controversy around things that have happened, and that's going to be Workreform. And why do I want to bring this up? Because I feel like this kind of touches on a big aspect of what people are deeming the culture war that humans are dealing with, and I wanted to talk about this in particular. So what is Workreform? Well, in this pinned post, they talk about what their core beliefs are and what their goals are. And it's people shouldn't be worked to death, people should be paid a living wage for their labor, income equality and power inequality are the primary causes of social strife, workers must join together to fight back for what's truly theirs, and we must not be divided and conquered. With their goals being better compensation, better worker representation, better and fewer working hours, stimulating a massive wave of worker organization, and organizing and supporting political causes and campaigns that put workers first. So on the outset, a lot of this is immediately palatable and agreeable. Like, people usually want workers to do better, feel better, get more stuff, etc., etc. But I feel like there's a few things here that are already a little hyperbolic, let's say, and it already seems to undercut some of their let's say impact that they could have. People should not be worked to death. Now, there's definitely some occupations out there where your safety is definitely in question. A lot of those are extremely hazardous. Take, for example, just firefighting. You're definitely putting your life on the line in order to get that job done. There's also things like being a coal miner that immediately come to my head because of the cave-ins and stuff. That's happened a lot. And I think construction work, because a lot of people end up sick from asbestos. Things like that, like where your safety is on the line, definitely kind of falls into this category. But what I think people end up associating with this is just going, oh, you have to work, 1/3 of your life, therefore you're being worked to death. And I'm not sure if that has the sting that they expect it to, because if you don't have a historical or even worldwide perspective on the amount of labor that it takes to just survive in other places, then this kind of seems out of touch to anyone who's aware of that. And while I'm mostly connected to American internet sources and web pages basically run by Americans, then I don't see a whole lot of that. But you can see documentaries and videos and exposés on what goes on in other countries, and it definitely seems like people in America and the rest of what's called the Western world have it pretty nice compared to other people. So complaining about having to be worked to death when you have relatively luxury lives compared to other people just seems a little bit out of touch. Secondly, people should be paid a living wage for their labor. That sounds nice on paper, but I think the problem is that whenever you're doing a job for somebody, you're not being paid to stay alive, you're being paid to do the job. And how much you get compensated should be based off of what you bring to the table. It shouldn't, if you have like a really high cost of living in an area and you need to pay for those things, just having a job doesn't mean that you should be paid enough to, reach the threshold for being able to survive at that point. You need to be able to provide for the company. And I don't know a good way of putting that doesn't sound kind of callous, but at the end of the day, if any institution wants to be sustainable, then you need to pay your workers at least less or as much as they are putting out for you, because otherwise it's unsustainable. Or you're going to have some workers paying for other people, and that's also not really fair. Even in a perfect society where you don't have to worry about profits at all, you still can't pay people more than what the resources it took to enact the job took. If you're paying more than you're reaping, then it's not sustainable and you're going to collapse. So saying that people should just get a living wage for their labor, I think is inaccurate. Like, it's idealistic maybe, because you need to have some kind of separation between what it requires to live and what's required out of a job. That might mean that you need to take multiple jobs, or you have to work longer hours, or maybe take a more hazardous job, which comes back to here, that gives you more money. But just saying that you should be paid a living wage for labor completely removes the aspects of what makes a wage the wage that it is. What you are bringing to the table, what your skills are, what your productivity is, any of those things that you are getting your wage for. Now, obviously, there could be huge discrepancies between people at the top and the bottom, and it could be that you could be afforded a higher wage if people took a cut, and I'm not going to disagree with that at all. However, I think from the outset, saying that you should be paid a living wage just for having labor is, it's kind of ridiculous, because if you're not putting out the labor to pay that living wage, then that means somebody else has to pay for it for you. And that sucks for them. That's not fair to them at all. So why am I talking about work reform? What's so bad about this? Yeah, they've got some hyperbolic statements, but obviously their intentions are just to better the world for people. Well, my contention is that I feel like there is an identity crisis here, because often what you'll see is complaints about economic systems. I often see people in here complaining that they need to have some kind of violent workers' revolution in order to get any change. And I feel like that's causing an identity crisis within the worker reform community, especially since it's come off the back of coming from the anti-work community. And I think in order to get the change necessary, there needs to be a consensus reached in this community on if they should go with incrementalism, where you basically make small changes through protesting, activism, and whatnot in order to get the things you want. Small changes over time is incrementalism, versus this revolutionary thinking where you basically need to overthrow the system. You need to change the people in power, put new people in, and completely overhaul everything in order to get what you want. And this clash it makes it seem like there isn't cohesion, and it gets in the way of the activism. So if you have the incrementalists, what they would want to do is to unionize, to get people to vote things to change their individual workspaces, maybe vote in politicians that are going to change policies, or maybe write legislation to help these things come to pass. Whereas the more revolutionary people say that is all a distraction, and what you actually need to do is be more extreme in your demands. Because if you actually think that the entire system is broken and that it only feeds in to keeping people in power with power, then of course you're not going to want to go the incrementalist route, because you're never going to get the success you want. You need to fundamentally change the system. So having these two groups of people occupying the same space, even though they both have the same desire for good outcomes for workers, means they're almost automatically at odds with each other in how they approach it. And it's kind of an unspoken schism here, where nobody is like having all out arguments on it, but you'll see both of them show up, where you'll have one person say, hey, we just need to get unions together. We just need to, band together and we can make some changes. And then you'll also have a whole bunch of people getting up votes on, we need to rein in the communist utopia. Otherwise, none of this is going to matter. And I think that's where this is going to be a problem. And the only reason I think, well, not the only reason, but I think a good reason why I can identify this problem is that it's happened so much over the past, say, 10 years, where a group of people would go online and form an activist group that is open to anyone. You could just basically be any blow Joe run-of-the-mill person. You join up with the community and you're just as valid as anyone else there. The problem with that is that there's no leadership, there's no hierarchy, there's no authority. And because of that, people can swing in any direction. It's also rife for false flagging events where people can say they're a part of your community, even though they really aren't, because there's no requirement to joining it. Having an organization that isn't organized doesn't necessarily lead to the change you want. And that you end up with these kind of like splitting of hairs, where you end up with some people that want to have this incrementalist change versus those that want to have a revolutionary change. And it just causes a schism. And that's how you end up with the situation where Antiwork had to go private, because they had one person try to speak for the entire group, even though the group itself didn't feel like they had authority to say anything. And then you end up having to have an entirely different subreddit form around it, try to reestablish yourself, and now you have people making their own posts saying, we need to focus on this, and then other people saying, well, I don't think that matters until we take care of this. These are necessary conversations, don't get me wrong. You have to have these in order to talk about it, but there needs to be some consensus made. Anti-work was around for 3 years before this big shakeup happened, and even then you could have those little things like, hey, should we try to include people on the right in this, because they also care about workers' rights? And you'll have those more incrementalist people saying, oh yes, what we need to do is invite them in here. Hopefully they'll change their views, they'll be persuaded against it. But those more extreme elements would say, no, those are directly the enemy, and until they agree with us, they are actively harming. And you can understand both perspectives if you empathize with it, because one necessarily recognizes the utility in having more people join your movement, whereas the other one recognizes the utility of ideological purity and trying to keep everyone focused on the same goal. And both of those are true in their own way, but in order to be effective, your group needs to be cohesive in how they approach it. This isn't going to be a long video. That's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to say. But for anyone who cares about workers' rights and work reform, obviously at the local level, wherever you work, if you can get the people that work with you to agree that you need to make changes, striking, boycotting are effective measures in a capitalist system to get the change that you want. As long as you have that critical mass of people that agree with you, then it will be necessary for the employer to change their practices to meet your goals. You might not get everything that you want. That's part of negotiations. And obviously it's not a skill that everyone has. It's definitely a social ability to be able to negotiate. So, you got to work on that. But start local. Report any of your successes to these avenues, because I'm sure other people want to pick up on what things have worked and not just talk about theoretically, if you do this, this, and that, it'll accomplish this or that. So try to stay focused on what you can do. Report the things that did work so other people can copy it. And I think that'll get your stuff done, whether or not you're the incrementalist or the revolutionary type. I'm not going to say that one is right more than the other, or that I necessarily agree with both, but that would be the best way to use these spaces, because the moment you try to organize behind these like completely anonymous groups, you're going to start having problems with certain people taking control, certain people false flagging you. It just becomes a big mess. So if you care about work reform, you can do it. Use these places to advocate and talk about what has worked. And until you succeed, take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. Take care.